and they had two speakers. They had two speakers, both of them were American, talking about Sudan. And as much as I really appreciated that, like everyone, regardless of where they are from, just speaking about Sudan is great and we really appreciate it. But at the same time, you know that like we all know that media exposure, visibility, having the ability to talk is a power these days. It shapes narratives and it gives you the power to even like influence political decisions. Um, so this ability to be visible, to talk about things is a power in itself. And Sudanese people don't get it that much. And our narratives and the story of us is usually um, shaped by people who are not even from where we're coming from, don't even speak our language, don't know anything about our culture. And this is why I'm really glad that MSU chose speakers that I know who are born and raised in Sudan. They lived there most of their life, if not all of it, in Sudan, and they know what it means to be Sudanese, which is something that we don't get a lot. Um, and our story as Sudanese is always told by others, either non-Sudanese or people who are like citizens of other countries but of Sudanese origins, and I would usually call them distant Sudanese. I mean, they have Sudanese origins, but I'll talk more about that. But I just really appreciate MSU doing this and having this kind of speakers today. So I'm a student here. I'm a PhD student here. As you can imagine, I talk about like being Sudanese because I was born and raised my whole life in Sudan, and I just came here to study just a few years ago. And when I first got admitted to Stanford, um, my dad was actually averse to me being here, coming to the US. He's never been into the US, and he was like, "Yeah, how like you want to go to that foreign place, with those people who have different cultures, speak different language. You don't have a single family member here, and I don't have a single family member here until now." So he was scared. So he was kind of very averse to me coming here, and I kind of agreed with him that, okay, so let me go and every single break I get, I will come back to Sudan. And that was like, I would have done it anyway, even if if we didn't make this agreement. So he was like, okay, I'll let you go and see what happens. And then I started my first year in my PhD here. And many people who might not know that, but as a Sudanese national, even before the war, if you are a Sudanese citizen holding a Sudanese passport, you go through this dual visa process in which if I want to meet my family or even going to a conference outside the US, that was before the war, I have to apply for the visa of the country I going to, and then I have to apply to go through the same process of getting the US visa to come back and finish my studies. So it's like a long process, and it's, by the way, it's a very pricey one. You pay a lot of money, and Sudanese people have been doing it for a long time, even before the war. So you can imagine how hard it is. That was before the war. And then in my first year, the war broke in Khartoum, which is my home country. My parents were there, and they resisted leaving our house for a long time. And in the US here, people, it's like, it's a daily thing that happens, that people move from one house to another, from one state to another. That's not something that is actually that common in Sudan. In Sudan, you might like you are born, raised, and you get married and you have children and you die in the same place, in the same neighborhood. So it's like really extremely hard for anyone to leave their house in Sudan. And that was the case for my parents. They were like, yeah, what are you like? I could have heard, I usually hear the bombs and the like the drones and the airplanes when I call them. But they were like, yeah, how could we leave our house? That's just impossible for them. And you can imagine the rest of the story. They had to leave at gunpoint because the RSF soldiers came to the neighborhood and forced everyone out of their house. And then, like since then until now, I haven't seen my family even once because I cannot. And recently, Sudan um, made it to the travel ban list. So if the process of going in and out was hard in the past, now it's impossible. So that promise, like, made to my father is just like impossible to keep now. And I have no idea. I don't even foresee a near future in which I can see my family anytime soon. So going back to the fact that we always go to events about Sudan, and people speak about Sudan who are either non-Sudanese and don't even have Sudanese origins, or they never lived in it. So how could you tell my story? How could you shape the narrative about my daily struggle if you have not lost sleep around your parents getting bombed or robbed or raped or whatever RSF has been doing to soldiers every day? How could you even imagine? How could you perceive whatever I'm going through and talk about my daily struggle if you have not gone through this? If you have not had to split your salary or your stipend to be sent back home. So your family who were living in dignity, who were living a very fine life before the war, now relying on you, even though, and this is not my story. I'm telling you a story of millions of Sudanese. And I'm actually one of the Sudanese people who are lucky, who are privileged to be doing their PhD at Stanford, right? Even though I cannot see my family, and I don't think I will be able to see them anytime soon. But still, I'm luckier than millions of others. And this is the story of every single Sudanese person I know. Now, even the students, even those who are living on a very few like pennies stipend, university stipends, now they are splitting that stipend to be sent home. Half of it is sent home for their, I don't know, like family members, extended family members. And Sudanese society is a very interconnected and very collective community. Um, so hi. So yeah, so if you have not gone through all of these struggles of not seeing your family, fearing that they might, I don't know, like maybe they are bombed or whatever happening to them, maybe they don't have access to healthcare, they are sick. If you have not lost sleep over this, how could you be able to tell my story and and shape the narrative around me, and maybe even go like further than that into shaping political decisions about me? And this is why I'm saying this to say that if you care about Sudan, and I assume you do, since you are spending time here listening to me and our my fellow speakers of from Sudan, if you are here listening to this, that means you care. And if you care, please make an effort to hear the voices of Sudanese people, not substitutes of them and not reflections of them, but their actual voices, the people who are going through this struggle daily, not people who are seeing it over the phones or hearing stories from a third person. Uh, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Samah, for that very powerful message. I think it's something a lot of people really need to hear, and a lot of people really need to acknowledge the actual horrors that are going on, for Sudanese in Sudan and Sudanese outside of Sudan. It's a very difficult struggle for us to really have to endure this and see our families really be put through so much. My name is Hamdi. I'm a sophomore at Stanford University, and like many other Sudanese students at Stanford, we really find it difficult to just cope with these things. I think I want to start off with a story. My aunt recently actually went to Sudan. So she took almost a 60-hour journey, taking a flight to Port Sudan, which is the only airport that is available to enter right now, and flying into Port Sudan and driving on a very, very small and dangerous bus through the entirety of Sudan, all the way to the end of Sudan to a town called Galadif. Galadif is on the eastern part of Sudan, right next to Ethiopia, and it's like the border town. And we were wondering, like, why is she doing this? What's going on? But I understood when she told me because she recently had a child, born in America, American citizenship, everything, very young, around 1 or 2 years old. And he would never have seen Sudan. She thought this would be the only time that her family, her parents, her siblings would ever see this child, or this child would ever be exposed to them, because she doesn't know what will happen to them in, 1 year, 2 years. They might be gone. They might be moved. Maybe they'll never even see this part of Sudan in the near future at all. So it's really difficult for us to, just imagine that something that's so integral to our existence just being stripped from us. I like had thoughts of going back to Sudan. It was when I was younger, it was like an almost expected thing. It's like, oh, when are we going to Sudan? It's going to be in the next year, next 2 years, something like that. And then immediately when we heard about this war, it's just that was just taken from us. An experience that feels so, universal and expected of us as a Sudanese person or someone living outside of our home country, we are not allowed that anymore. I hear about my friends going home for break, my friends in like Colombia or my friends in Europe or something going home to visit their family. And it just really pains me because I will not experience that in a very, very long time. And I think people need to understand that this war is affecting people outside of Sudan. Yes, we are here to discuss the harrowing things that are going on within Sudan and how much it's really affecting people in places like Al-Fashir or, of course, the rubble that is Khartoum at this point. And I think it's very important that we, like she said, have panelists who actually have an understanding of Sudan and an understanding of what we've been through and understanding of what it means to be a Sudanese person, not just in Sudan, but outside of Sudan as well. And I really truly hope that everyone gets a, very enlightening experience, not only just understanding what's going on and understanding your peers, because a lot of people do not know and do not know anything that's going on in Sudan. I've been asked many questions. I'll tell a person, "Oh, I'm from Sudan," and they'd be like, "Oh, have you visited anytime soon?" And then I'll be like, "No." I'll tell them about the war and everything, and they always give me the same response. I didn't know. And it really does hurt that, we're getting no recognition at all, honestly, especially from people that are meant to be at the head of the world in terms of this institution. So I really hope everyone here, gains a lot more understanding and experience into what is going on in Sudan and really use that to empathize with people that are suffering all over the world as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much to our students for sharing these reflections. That was very wonderful to hear. And inshallah, I think now we are ready to maybe hear a little bit more about the history and the origins of this conflict so that we can all get a greater understanding as they shared. And so in order to start, we're first going to hear from our brother Husam, who is going to speak a little bit about the origins of the conflict as well as Sudan's recent history. And then we will be hearing a little bit about the government's failures from Professor Ibrahim, and then end off with a discussion of international relations from Dr. Zaidan, inshallah. So let's get started with Husam. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you, Zainab. Thank you, Samah. Thank you, Hamdi, for sharing your personal stories. This is very touching. And I think most Sudanese can relate to your stories. Thank you, Zainab, and thank you to Stanford University Muslim Student Union for giving me the opportunity to be with you and speak about Sudan. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today or tonight. This is a moment when Sudan is enduring one of the darkest chapters in its modern history. What I want to share with you is not simply a narrative of war, nor a story of a distant conflict playing out somewhere on the margins of the world. Sudan's tragedy is deeply connected to regional and international dynamics, to geopolitical choices, and to global systems of power that shape the lives and struggles of people far beyond Sudan's borders. I want to begin with a place that has now become a symbol of this crisis, the city of Al-Fashir. For more than 2 years, Al-Fashir was the final refuge for hundreds of thousands of displaced Sudanese people and became the last significant government-held city in Darfur, an area as large as Spain or France. It was a place where families who had fled violence elsewhere hoped they might survive. It was also a city whose fall was predicted with devastating accuracy. Everyone who understood the dynamics of the war knew that al-Fashir was in the crosshairs of the Rapid Support Forces, RSF. Everyone knew what could happen. And when the RSF finally stormed the city about 5 weeks ago, the catastrophe that followed was not a surprise. It was the culmination of years, indeed decades, of impunity, militarization, regional interference, and an international system that has consistently chosen convenience over accountability. Sister Zainab, you can share the slides. Yes, please. There is a way in which al-Fashir's tragedy belongs to a lineage we have seen over and over again. From the crimes of the Nazis to the genocide in Rwanda, to the wars in Congo and Yemen, and the ongoing catastrophe in Gaza, the world has perfected a particular form of moral theater. It expresses shock after the fact. It grieves selectively. It insists with great conviction that it did not know, or that it was misled, or that it lacked the tools to act. And then years later, it recasts itself as having always stood on the right side. Egyptian Canadian American author Omar Al-Akkad captured this perfectly in the title of his book on Gaza, One Day Everyone Will Have Always Been Against This. Al-Fashir fits this pattern. The world saw what was happening in real time with satellite images, videos, testimonies, and reports. There was no shortage of evidence. What was absent was the political will to act. And so tonight, I want to trace the road that led to Al-Fashir, to explain why this massacre did not appear suddenly or unexpectedly, to show the political, historical, and regional structures that made it possible, and to highlight something deeper, that Sudan's crisis is not isolated. It's part of a global architecture that links the struggles of peoples in Sudan to the struggles of people elsewhere, and ties their suffering to the same networks of power, the same governments, the same flows of money, and often the same indifference. Let me return to Al-Fashir itself. By early 2024, the RSF had already taken the other capitals of Darfur. The Sudanese armed forces were reduced to a single major outpost in the city. Hundreds of thousands of displaced civilians, many already uprooted multiple times, were trapped between the front lines. The RSF encircled the city, cutting off water facilities, supply routes, and humanitarian assistance. They bombed hospitals and mosques. The siege strategy was clear: starve the population, weaken the defenders, and then take the city by force. When the RSF finally entered Al-Fashir, they carried out systematic house-to-house killings. Medical staff were murdered in hospitals, patients were executed where they lay, homes were burned, entire neighborhoods were emptied. People who attempted to flee were shot. Many of these crimes were filmed and posted online by RSF fighters themselves, a deliberate tactic of terror, not an accident or collateral damage. Satellite imagery later confirmed mass graves. Activists, humanitarian workers, and Sudanese civil networks documented these crimes in detail. The world once again watched. But Al-Fashir did not happen because the world lacked information. It happened because Sudan's crisis is built on an architecture that has long rewarded violence and avoided accountability. To understand Al-Fashir, we must pull back and examine the architecture, beginning with Sudan's political formation. And I think here, Sister Zainab, you can go back to, let me open the slides. Yeah. So you can go back to slide number 2. Slide number 3, right? Yeah. So Sudan entered independence in 1956 with deep structural inequalities. Political and economic power were heavily concentrated in Khartoum and a small segment of the population. Peripheral regions like Darfur, South Sudan before secession, the Nuba Mountains, and others were systematically marginalized. These communities were denied equitable access to resources and basic services, excluded from national decision-making, and governed through coercive and often violent means. Decades of political instability, repeated coups, and the inability of civilian elites to create inclusive governance only deepened these fractures. The state became increasingly militarized. Armed groups proliferated, local grievances accumulated, and successive governments, just like the British colonizers before them, relied on divide and rule tactics that exploited ethnic and regional tensions. The 1989 coup by the National Islamic Front pushed the country further down this path. In Darfur, the regime armed Arab-identified militias to weaken local rebellions and assert control. These militias, known as the Janjaweed, led some of the most brutal campaigns of violence in the early 2000s. Their actions were widely recognized as crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing, and in some documented cases, genocide. Yet, despite global attention, meaningful accountability did not arrive. This failure was not abstract, it was structural. The Janjaweed's commanders grew richer, their networks expanded, their power entrenched itself. The world condemned but did not punish. And out of this protected ecosystem, the Rapid Support Forces emerged. In the early 2010s, the Sudanese government sought to formalize and recognize the Janjaweed. They created the Rapid Support Forces, placed them under the command of Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, also known as Himeti, and elevated them to a new status. The RSF received official recognition, new uniforms, large budgets, and a level of autonomy previously unseen in Sudan's security sector. The RSF quickly grew into something much more than a militia. It built a political network inside Sudan's power structures. It accumulated wealth through gold mining in Darfur. It developed transnational ties by sending fighters to Yemen under the Saudi-UAE coalition and entering the Libyan conflict. The European Union, through its so-called illegal migration management agenda, Khartoum process, worked with Sudanese authorities in ways that indirectly legitimized and enriched the RSF. The RSF also exported gold to the UAE, to Dubai, deepening its financial lifeline and embedding itself in global supply chains. By 2019, the RSF was a state within a state, an armed, wealthy, politically connected, regionally networked force with a leadership that understood the value of external alliances and international legitimacy. All of this unfolded because the world allowed it to unfold. It was not hidden. It was not a secret. It was simply convenient for many actors, including the Sudanese regime then and its international partners, to let the RSF grow. This was one of the pillars that made Al-Fashir possible, a militia empowered by decades of impunity and enriched by strategic partnerships. Zainab, if you go to the next slide. In 2018 and 2019, the Sudanese people rose up in a remarkable democratic revolution, the December 2018 revolution. Youth, women, professionals, unions, neighborhood committees, and grassroots groups came together to demand an end to dictatorship and the creation of a civilian-led state. Their courage brought down Omar al-Bashir, but it did not dismantle the structures that had sustained his rule. The security establishment remained intact. The RSF remained intact, and the deep militarized networks that had governed Sudan for decades remained intact. The massacre of June 3rd, 2019, when the Sudanese armed forces and the Rapid Support Forces jointly attacked peaceful protesters in Khartoum, should have been a turning point. It was a blatant demonstration of the nature of Sudan's security forces. Bodies were burned, women were raped, protesters were thrown into the Nile. It was the moment the world should have insisted on accountability and a total restructuring of the security sector. Instead, international mediators pushed civilians into a power-sharing agreement with the very forces that had committed the massacre. The transition was celebrated abroad, but it was built on a foundational contradiction. expecting democracy to emerge while leaving its greatest enemy in charge of the institutions of violence. That contradiction exploded in October 2021 when the army and RSF overthrew the civilian-led transitional government. The coup was not a surprise. It was the predictable outcome of a transition designed without justice, without civilian control, and without confronting the power of the generals. And it paved the way for the war that began in April 2023. We go to the next slide. When the war broke out on April 15, 2023, the immediate spark appeared to be a dispute over integrating the RSF into the Sudanese armed forces. But the deeper struggle was for control of Sudan itself, its wealth, its future, its political identity, and its place in the region. The RSF quickly overran much of Khartoum using urban warfare tactics that placed civilians directly in the line of fire. They occupied homes, hospitals, and public buildings, turning civilian neighborhoods into military zones like Samah and Hamdi just explained. The Sudanese armed forces responded with airstrikes that devastated infrastructure and residential areas. Millions fled. But Darfur once again became the center of systematic targeted violence. The RSF and allied militias returned to the playbook of the 2000s, killing civilians, burning villages, committing mass sexual violence, and dismantling entire communities. The scale and coordination of these atrocities revealed a militia not only comfortable with impunity, but emboldened by it. All of this set the stage for al-Fashir. Sudan's war is not a purely internal conflict. It is deeply shaped by regional powers. Chief among them is the United Arab Emirates. To understand the UAE's role, we must introduce an important concept, sub-imperialism, which refers to a phenomenon where a country, while not being a global imperial superpower, acts in ways that align with or support the interests of dominant global powers and simultaneously behaves in an imperialist manner within its own region. It describes a state that extends its political, economic, and military influence over neighboring countries, often collaborating with major powers and benefiting from their protection. Sub-imperial powers reinforce regional hierarchies, advance their strategic agendas, and intervene in the affairs of other nations while reinforcing the broader global power structures. The UAE fits this definition with striking clarity. Actually, Israel is another sub-imperial power in the Middle East area. The UAE is not an imperial power in the traditional sense, but it increasingly behaves like one in the Red Sea Basin, the Horn of Africa, and the Sahel, and much of the wider Middle East and Africa. It projects power through ports, bases, political alliances, mercenary networks, and economic leverage. It aligns closely with global powers such as the United States and the United Kingdom, benefiting from their political cover while advancing its own regional ambitions. In Sudan, the UAE has emerged as the most significant external backer of the Rapid Support Forces. This is not speculation. It is documented in UN panel of experts reports, satellite imagery, weapons tracing, investigations, testimonies from captured fighters, and independent research. It is reflected in the flow of Sudanese gold to Dubai, a flow that finances the RSF's war economy. It is evident in arms shipments routed through regional intermediaries like Chad, Libya, Somalia, and other countries. It is visible in the RSF leadership's presence, business interests, and networks in the United Arab Emirates. The UAE's involvement in Sudan is part of a broader strategy to shape outcomes across the Red Sea corridor. It seeks control over ports, influence over trade routes, leverage in conflict zones, and dominance in emerging markets such as agriculture, logistics, mining, and security. Its actions are driven by a mix of economic ambitions, political influence objectives, and a desire to suppress democratic or revolutionary movements that could challenge authoritarian regional order. This is sub-imperialism in practice, and it is one of the core pillars of Sudan's unfolding catastrophe. One of the most troubling dynamics of this war, however, is the behavior of Western governments. The United States, the United Kingdom, and the European Union have effectively outsourced their Sudan policy to the UAE. Instead of treating the UAE as a party to the conflict, even after overwhelming evidence, they embraced it as a mediator. This approach was justified as pragmatism. The argument went something like this: the UAE is already involved. It's too strategically important to confront. Better to include it in the mediation than alienate it. But this was never pragmatism. It was a structural conflict of interest. It placed a belligerent actor at the heart of the mediation. It gave the UAE the ability to shape the diplomatic process, protect the RSF, and sustain the very war machine that was destroying Sudan. The international system treated the RSF and SAF as equivalent actors, despite overwhelming evidence that atrocities were disproportionately committed by the RSF. This false symmetry contributed to diplomatic paralysis, enabling the RSF to advance with little fear of meaningful consequences. This dynamic is not new. It reflects a broader global trend in which authoritarian allies receive political protection, democratic movements are sidelined, and human rights considerations are treated as optional. And it is another reason why al-Fashir became inevitable. Sudan's war is deeply Sudanese, but it's not only that. It exposes the architecture of global impunity and the networks of economic and political power that shape outcomes from one region to another. The same actors who benefit from Sudan's gold networks benefit from global supply chains elsewhere. The same governments that provide political cover for militias in Darfur provide cover in other conflicts. The same logic of stability over democracy plays out in Yemen, in Libya, in the Sahel, and in Palestine. The same multinational corporations, ports, logistics hubs, and financial centers appear repeatedly in these cases. Sudan's suffering is not an aberration. It is part of a wider pattern in which the lives of ordinary people are treated as expendable, and where geopolitical alliances matter more than human rights. This is why Sudan's struggle is deeply connected to other struggles. It is why people recognize echoes of al-Fashir in other places, in the siege of Gaza, in the wars in Congo, in the destruction of communities in Yemen, and other places. These crises are linked by shared structures of power, shared supply chains, shared alliances, and shared political calculation. Understanding Sudan requires understanding this global context. Even in the face of this, and with a positive note here, even in the face of this architecture of violence, Sudanese civilians have built extraordinary networks of survival. Resistance committees, emergency response rooms, doctors, engineers, teachers, women groups, lawyers, and activists have sustained communities throughout the war. They have organized evacuations, delivered medicines, shared food, and documented atrocities when the world looked away. These groups embody the true political force of the Sudanese people. They represent a vision of Sudan grounded not in militarism or authoritarianism, but in community, justice, and civilian rule. They are the inheritors of the December Revolution spirit, and they continue to work even when the world fails to support them. Their labor is a reminder that Sudan's future belongs not to generals or warlords, but to its people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much, Husam. We'll just fix the sound here. That was absolutely great. I mean, you took us through a part of history that was very relevant to today, and in order for us to deconstruct this is the context makes a lot of sense. I want to just in terms of time, I just want to move on to Dr. Ibrahim, and then we'll take Q&A at the end. But thank you so much, Husam, and I'll give the floor to Dr. Ibrahim.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. مسموع؟
Yes, Prof. Abdullahi, مسموع.
I'd like to thank the Muslim Student Organization for this invitation. This is the first time I get anything from any university to talk about Sudan. That is really encouraging, and I am impressed by the stories given by Samah and Hamdi. Impressed and sorry. Thank you, Zainab, for this invitation, and I'm glad to be on the same panel with Hisham, Husam, Zaidan. I've been reading their stuff here and there, very enlightening and very courageous. And this is the first time we seem to come together on this, and I hope this will be something to be developed further. My comments will address what led to war. I will argue that it was Qaht, that is, the forces for freedom and change, the alliance that led the revolution of December 2018 and formed the transitional government, which the military removed in October 2021. It was Qaht, or it is Qaht, that caused the war. I'm coming from Qaht itself. I belong to Qaht. I've been with this advocacy of progress and democracy and change all my life. And I have kept a distance from them for a long, long time. But I consider it as my movement. And my address here will be like a critique of my movement. I have been doing that for decades. And I'm really scared that seeing this group that embodies my in fact my life is committing suicide because it doesn't want to look deeply into its performance, its actions, its responsibilities, and it seems to see every other institutions on the wrong side of history except them. And this is the reason why I'm focusing here on the mistakes of the revolutionaries, their inadequacies, their shielding themselves from intervention, intervening in their own line of thinking and line of action, and getting to know themselves and their cause and their people in a better life. So it is a critique of my movement. Okay, so that is the beginning. In its desire to return to power, aided by international enablers, Qaht concocted a military and security reform plan, came to be known as the Agreement Framework. This is my own translation, to remove the military from politics and clear the way for Qaht to return to power. Although engendered in the pursuit of bringing closure, the crisis that resulted from the October coup, the military coup against the government, the plan was ill-conceived and ignorant of the realities of the situation, ignorant especially of the situation of the RFS. Irritated by the simplicity of the reform that promised to deliver the untenable and the outright stupid idea, I wrote a column on my Facebook page titled, "Nobility is not a Strategy." Various theories about the cause of the war have been floated. The Qaht faction who are the community behind the motto, no to war, say that the war is an absurdity serving no purpose whatsoever, except for the ambition of two unrelentingly ambitious generals, that's Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo of the SAF and RSF. Paradoxically, the same strongly believed that the war was started by the Muslim Brotherhood using their officers in SAF, that is Sudan Armed Forces, with the intent of returning to power they had been removed from by the December Revolution. So it is absurd, but you have some actors, real actors who were behind it. Looking in the background, however, is a second war between the left, the elite who led the revolution, and the right, represented by the Muslim Brothers, which is a mere reenactment. This war, there is this war going on the fields, and there is a war between the left and right on who's responsible for the war. And this is a reenactment of the history of these two entities in student politics. It goes back to the 1940s. So they are at loggerheads for decades. And this war, which is going in the field, is just there. But the real war is the war between these two groups. This is the war. The other is a kind of a reflection of the thing, is a product or something else. What does the military and security reform advocated by Qaht want to do with the RSF? Had they known a little of the history of the legislation that went into the rise of the RSF, they would have thought twice before venturing in uncharted waters. Simply said, the reform wants to do away with an independent military contingent that is and integrate it in SAF, that is taking the RSF and integrating it, dissolving it into the SAF. The autonomous status of the RSF was granted to it by the Inqaz government, that is the Muslim government, in recognition of its role in doing the counterinsurgency against Darfur rebels beginning from 2004 on the cheap, doing that counterinsurgency on the cheap. President Bashir had other plans for it. He further wanted it in the capacity of a Republican Guards to rescue him from his own army if the worst come to the worst. Secondly, the reform wants to disengage the military, whether it's the SAF or RSF, and all other militias from the marketplace. They were not allowed to do business there. So these are the two elements of the reform. Doing away with the RFS and removing them from the marketplace. The military has nothing to do. The military has nothing to do with the investment and business. AF and the RSF entered into an alliance since their V2 coup in April 2019 to work against the revolution. It is a reality that is also not really considered, that the removal of the Enghaz government in April 2019 was a V2 coup. That is a coup that is just taking its time to come back and to undermine the revolution. This is called a veto coup. It's because the old regime that was unsustainable, and so some elements of this regime would like to rescue it, to continue with the old regime minus the actors, the major actors, and so they do this in the with the idea of really killing the revolution a little by little. So that was, and that is what Husam said about the sit-in in the military barracks, the headquarters, and how they really massacred the young people and that sit-in in which they forced this military to remove the military government, I mean the Inqaz government, and the sit-in continued because they want to pressure the military to evacuate politics, not to do anything with politics, and to give all the power to the civilian leadership. Metis was working with Burhan. They were in alliance to kill the revolution. But Hamdi, throughout this connection or this relationship with the Burhan and the SAF, was working to secure the autonomy of the RSF. This is an idea that he strongly believed in from the time the Inqaz passed the 2017 legislation recognizing it as an independent force and that the leadership of the then president of the republic. So I'd like to say that you need to know that Hamdi has never reconciled with the idea of dissolving his troops. The RS was only required, according to the 2017 legislation, was only required to come under the leadership of the army in emergency situations and for the duration. So the army had no authority over the RSF or RSF at all, except in emergency situations. Mohamed Salman wrote an interesting book on the one of the few books on the RSF, and says it took Hamdi and the military and the president, that is al-Bashir, it took them a whole year of negotiations to come up with that kind of legislation. That means Hamdi was really working very hard on as early as 2017 to maintain the autonomy and the independence of the RSF. After passing the legislation granting the autonomy of the RSF, Hamdi was interviewed by S24, and he unequivocally emphasized the role of his forces as the second army as early as 2017. The broadcaster asked, what would the fate of the RSF would be after finishing the job it has been called for? Is it going to be part of the army? That was the question. Hamdi said it will remain the RSF. It will keep training its soldiers and qualify them. It is a military force now. The guy asked him, do you say it will be with us for good? Hamdi said, do you mean to say that it will be thrown at the dogs when its mission is completed? The guy asked him, why not become part of the army? Hamdi said, it is an army in its own right. You can see the kind of determination that that guy has in 2017. The revolution and the post-revolution arrangements were got sent to RSF. Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, and they led the coup, as they told you, and they removed the Benghazi regime. And then they started to work together to undermine the revolution. That was another story. But in this kind of close contact and working together with al-Burhan and SF against the revolution, some good things happened to Hamdi. The post-revolution arrangements showered privileges and statuses on Hamdi. And I'll count them. On the 13th of April 2019, Hamdi became the vice president of the military councils that led the coup, the military coup in April 19. In July 19, an amendment of the RSF law enlarged its mission to include combating terrorism and things like that. So Hamdi started to work on legislation with Burhan and with the SF to increase its missions and to strengthen its independence. Again, Hamdi was appointed the vice president of the Supreme Council of the Transitional Government. Again, an amendment in August 19 removed from the RSF law all articles giving the army authority over the RSF in emergency situations. The army had only one authority over the RSF in emergency situations. Hamdi removed that altogether. Another amendment canceled the article in the 2017 law that gave the president of the republic the authority to dissolve the RSF into the army. He worked very hard even to remove the power of the president of the republic to order the dissolving of the RSF in the army, because the president was the only authority that could have done that. The RF became thus an independent military force, not answerable to the armed forces at all. The resources and the status enabled Hamdi to connect to local, regional, and international communities. Suffice it to say that the close relations he has had with the UAE now originated in his days in the transitional government. Mohamed Salman, the writer that I mentioned before, hit it right on the head by saying that if Hamdi was unrelentingly working for a single thing since the formation of the RSF, it was to have absolutely nothing to do with the SAF. So you have this GATT plan to do what? The security and the military plan agreement. They wanted to dissolve the RSF, the RFS into the military. And that seems like it wasn't going to happen at all, because he worked not to do that. But in certain circumstances, anyway, I'm not going to get into it, Hamdi had to bend backwards and placate the civilian revolution in the government and their international partners and signed to the agreement framework of January 2023. So he accepted the framework, the reform. When asked when he would deliver on the integration, that integration of his troops into the Samah, Sudan armed forces, he said in 20 years. The civilian revolutionaries began negotiating with him to decrease the span to 5 years or less. They were unmindful that Hemeti was like telling them, no way, Jose. Integration is unnegotiable, period. Those who thought Hemeti was giving them a deadline should have been familiar with the foretale of the prince, the Fagir, that is the man of religion, and the camel, to decipher the intent of this streetwise man. I will tell this story in another occasion. He told them, in 20 years, I'll do that. And then these guys started to negotiate, like, no, 10 years, 5 years, next Wednesday. It was just silly. The other thing, and I call it is economy, is stupid. The Arab people never reference or make any mention to the economy behind the RFS. You hear nothing about it. No one tells you about that. There was an economy behind this thing. So it will be next to impossible to understand Hemeti's insistence on the autonomy of the RFS in isolation of the reality of the political economy of the Dagalos, that is Hemeti's family. His name is Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo. Those guys Dagalo. So there is an economy to it. There is this is family deep into business. Breaking the Bank is the book report by some institutions describe the RFS as family business that sought to work independently of the state and as part of an international and regional network for investment and profit. The family, for example, holds 58% of the stocks of the Gulf Bank. The story, the report goes on on the economy of this.
Dr. Ibrahim, we have 2 minutes.
I'll finish before that, I hope. So, and if you are paying attention to some of the sanctions meted out by the United States government, the Gulf Bank was sanctioned like 3-4 months ago. Britain sanctioned this bank like a year or 2 years ago. So this economy was ignored by Qatar. As I said, you will hear about this economy. You will not hear about this economy in any of the political communities in the country. Worse, the agreement frame, and this is the other thing about the reform, that is the family, that the RFS was prohibited by the reform, by the military and security reform is prohibited, like the army, like all the other militias, from engaging in businesses. So this reform presented by Qahtis is really asking the RFS to commit suicide. And that was impossible. That is what I said. You are asking the RFS to liquidate it and to take the money out of them, to take the business out of them. And that was too much. And this is the reason why Hamid's answer to the people when they asked him, when are you going to deliver on this? He said 20 years. So I'm concluding here, and I'm saying that this seems like, you know, a radical critique of Qaht. Thank God it's not coming from an enemy of it. It is coming from someone who belonged to it, even belonged more in more years than most of them to the cause of change and revolution. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ibrahim. Oh, we got a little.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. Abdullahi. Yeah, just I just wanted to clarify that for those who don't know a lot about like the Sudan internal situation, and probably the terms might have been a little bit difficult to understand, but Dr. Abdullahi gave us like an overview of some of the internal factors and the internal players that might have contributed to the situation. But now we will hear from Yasir, who's going to speak a little bit about the international intervention in the war. So the stage is yours, Yasir.
Yeah, thank you very much, Samah. First, I would like to thank the
We cannot
MSU.
hear him. We cannot hear Yasir.
Samah, I was able to hear Yasser. I'm not sure if it was you. You were not able to hear Zainab also earlier. But Yasser, when you talked, I was able to hear you.
Can you hear now?
We have
Assalamu alaikum.
Yeah, we're good to go now.
طيب. Assalamu alaikum. First, yeah, thank you very much, Samah and Zainab and MSU for MSU Stanford for organizing this and the invitation. And yeah, and I was really touched by Samah's and Hamdi's remarks. I think that what we need to do as Sudanese is that for people who have something at stake now with this war, to reclaim narratives and to reclaim our issues. I'm also very honored to be in this panel with Professor Abdullahi Ibrahim, a role model in Sudanese academia, not just for his academic contribution, but for his stand in this war as well. And actually also Bashmuhandis Husam, I'm very honored to be with you today. We have, as Professor said, we have been reading your work with very grateful to your work as well. So I will, as Samah said, I will talk a little bit about the role of regional actually actors, and I will focus on the UAE. For one reason that my research is on port and port development in the Red Sea. I follow the UAE port investment projects in 3 sites in the Red Sea, in Port Sudan, which is in Sudan, and also in Djibouti and Aqaba. These are like different sites in the Red Sea. And when the war started, I was actually doing my field research in Sudan. So I was there when the war started and had to be evacuated out of Khartoum to Port Sudan and to Saudi Arabia. So the research became kind of an opening for my own analysis of what's happening. But I will begin with we'll begin with the United Arab Emirates, but why the UAE? The UAE is, as we know, a petro Gulf country that is a bit far from the Red Sea, a bit far from the Horn of Africa, but has been very active and engaged in this region. there is so many kind of theories trying to explain why the UAE is active. Uh, but I think one of the main reasons is that like in around 2011 and with the Arab Spring, the UAE internal kind of governing dynamics felt there is a threat of this revolution that has been spreading through the Arab countries and specifically like Egypt, Tunisia, but also Syria and Yemen as well. So this is like a kind of a genuine threat of political change that has been going all over the Middle East. And also this retreat from global powers that has been playing kind of a policing role in this region, like the United States and other like European Union, the UK. It seemed like in beyond 2011 and beyond, these power are focusing more on other issues and an isolationist trend, specifically after the first Trump administration. I think that was 2016. Uh, at that kind of like the regional dynamic that has been going was seeing the UAE as being more aggressive in kind of achieving their policies. But their policies also has been seen in two main ways. There is military intervention, which is like the hard power arm of their policy, but also this kind of financial economic intervention. This has been um, going through port lease, long port lease in the Red Sea, in the Indian Ocean, but also in Egypt, the Mediterranean, and also the west shores of Africa as well. This dynamic also kind of, increased rapidly when the UAE also decided to intervene in Yemen, the Yemen war of 2015. At the same time, as Husam has also like laid out, is that the Bashir regime was going through very difficult economic situations. It was trying to reposition itself in these regional dynamics. And the Bashir regime decided to cut ties with Iran and to change side and to be like an ally to Saudi Arabia and UAE. In that, I think the year after that, al-Bashir decided to send troops with the UAE and Saudi Arabia troops in Yemen. And within these troops was the RSF, which by now all of you know the Rapid Support Forces led by Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo. That part in particular, I think, when the UAE project kind of started to emerge about what's going to happen with Sudan. At the same time as well, I would like to highlight that the UAE tried to lease the port terminal in Port Sudan. I think was early 2016, and it goes in 2018 when I also went back to Port Sudan and see like what was going on. It was rejected by the local kind of protest, but also they tried to come under a different banner, like a Filipino port company in Port Sudan. So this is like the first um, appearance of that UAE interest in intervening in Sudan. Fast forward when, of course, the 2019 uprising happened. Um, there was the regime changed, but the UAE interest was intact. They kept their interest through the RSF, of course, but also after the revolution, the uprising, they started to manipulate and to influence civilian partners. That was, evidenced by trips to Abu Dhabi and Dubai by FFC leaders, and it seemed that the EU would like to play a role in the transition itself. As Professor Abdullahi and Husam also led, the RSF also grew or increased their political and economic capabilities during the transition. But I would like also to highlight that there was an anti-Emirati sentiment in the protest itself. So, and I think the UAE saw this as a threat to their own interest, to their own players, actors like the RSF. And with aligning and with like intervening with these civilian leaders, they wanted kind of to suppress these popular sentiment against the intervention of the UAE. So this, this transition particularly, I think the failure of transition is particularly because of these regional intervention, specifically by these Gulf actors. During the transition as well, I will highlight two occasions where, you can see this like UAE continuous interest in Sudan and continuous meddling with Sudanese local dynamics. In 2021, there was a border dispute between the Sudanese government and the Ethiopian government. I know Hamdi, spoke about Al-Gadarif. So Al-Fashaga is very close to Al-Gadarif, and there was a dispute if Al-Fashaga um, is a Sudanese land or an Ethiopian land. There were some Ethiopian groups who actually invaded that region, and there was a military buildup in that area. So the UAE intervened in this issue, and they offered to mediate between Ethiopia and Sudan, and they, offered this very surprising offer is that the area is gonna be divided 40% to Sudan, 40% to Ethiopia, and the rest is gonna be for the EU to be like a cooperation land. And so you can see this continuation of land grab of lease offers that the UAE is trying to offer to the Sudanese government. However, that offer was rejected by the military, and it's worth noting that the RSF was not involved at all in this dispute. The RSF refused to actually mobilize the troops to Al Fashaga. In 2022, there was another uh, intervention or like offer by the United Arab Emirates is that to build a new port in Abu Amama, which is 10 kilometers north of Port Sudan. This is also an interesting project because it's not just a port, it's a $6 billion mega project that would build a new port, new highway and railway that connect the port with the agricultural farms the UAE already has in northern Sudan. So this is like, a kind of a comprehensive ecosystem, and the UAE has been planning for it, but also the RSF was really involved in that project by Hemeti has been trying to influence the tribes, the Bisharian tribe in northern Port Sudan by gifts. They were trying to kind of even create a navy or like a naval base for the RSF in that area to kind of protect these projects, which is it's very important to understand these dynamics after the war and how the RSF lost Port Sudan and lost the kind of the eastern part in general. When the war broke out in April 2023, it started in Khartoum, but from my analysis, that was an attempt by the UAE local actor to take power in a very clean kind of military action that was supposed to take just a few hours. But luckily that failed. And from that moment until now, we've been seeing, evidence of heavy UAE involvement in the war, sometimes under the banner of humanitarian aid, but sometimes very clearly like sending weapons in airfields like the Jaras field in Chad, but also inside Sudan, like the Niala airport. The UAE not just like has been involved militarily, but also in diplomatic ways, trying to cover the RSF. We have seen this in the UN Security Council, the kind of delayed response of condemning the RSF, but also in covering the RSF in various capitals in the West, like London and Washington, D.C. In fact, an RSF delegation was in Washington, D.C. just days before the invasion of Al-Fashir. And I think it was a very, my own analysis that that was a UAE plot to kind of cover the start of the invasion of Al-Fashir, giving the world a false image that some kind of a ceasefire is achievable. So that's how, in like in very brief, how the UAE is involved in this war. But also, it kind of lays an overview of how this Gulf country is not just involved in Sudan, it's involved in Libya as well. It's involved with Wagner and the Ukrainian and the war in Ukraine, and in so many countries in the region. As Husam actually, I think, mentioned, is that it became evident that this is a new imperial um, uh, actor that is acting because of the enabling of the international system, with the retreat of these uh, great powers, using Mearshmeyer's terminology. We will see these regional imperialists get and more interest and power in the region. I would like also to mention, since this is also about other regional actors, we know that the Sudanese armed forces like receive support from Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey, and even Iran, but by no any way compared to what the United Arab Emirates is doing with the RSF. Actually, my own analysis is that these kind of ties of the Sudanese armed forces is particularly as any military would try to buy weapons or like arms sales from these countries specifically, as the United Arab Emirates has been also blockading the army from getting any kind of weapon or military logistics from international markets. It's yet to be seen if this relation and arms sale is going to be developed into a more kind of military um, alliance. But for now, I think the Sudanese armed forces um, is fighting this war alone, but without any kind of very direct intervention from these friends or regional backers. And with that, I would conclude and look forward to the questions from the audience.
Thank you so much. Maybe one. Thank you, all the speakers. Thank you, Yasir. This was the context here again is important, right? So what we have done now is we've looked at three different phases, three different themes. So we've looked at the history. So how did these various events interlink each other? Who are the actors? And then on the ground, Dr. Ibrahim, on the ground, what happens then if there is, what are the actors doing on the ground? So how are people responding themselves? I think in itself, giving a little bit more grammar to what people are doing. What does revolution, what does protest, what does resistance look like, right? So, and then Yasser, you provided us with a deep analysis of UAE as an actor, which often I can tell you within the discussions that I have, it's always a question mark. What is the UAE suddenly doing there? And what you're basically referring to is that there's a history. There are people who there are efforts there years before trying to at least occupy parts of the economy and have a say. And you often mentioned the ports, the sea over there. All of these are important elements. Now, bringing these things all together, that's what we then call, well, it's very complex. But we need to do this. I just said, like, we have to keep talking about this. Okay, so I do have the tendency to talk a lot, but we have a couple of minutes left. If there anyone with questions online or here in the room, maybe perhaps some clarifications, yeah, or over Zoom. Yeah. I'll read it out loud. I don't think we have. Okay. So we have a question from Abu Bakr Mohamed, who asked, since the war in Sudan has many local and regional causes, complex political circumstances and historical background, and as a Stanford student alumni, how can I describe or explain the war and the UAE's role to my other colleagues? And we're kind of talking about that. It's just a very odd one, right? As in the role of the UAE. So he mentioned, like, I know a brief yet accurate and representative way in a 5 to 10 minutes, and what reliable resources to direct people interested in this case to know more. I think that's a great question. Yasir, do you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, this is a very important question, and I think we deal with it every day in our life. And since I came, I came back from Sudan. I wasn't, during the war, I spent like a month in Sudan and came back to Seattle, and it's been like nobody knows about it. Nobody's actually touched by it. And I think that because we as Sudanese did not do our homework to kind of portray this war rightfully. I would answer that, and I think I'm gonna borrow Dr. Oshari Khalil. He's also a friend of Ibrahim. Like when he was asked about to describe this war, and he said this is a war of aggression by the United Arab Emirates. Despite all the complexity of like the politics, the actors, there is no reason by the UAE to intervene in this war. In if you take like the international law perspective. Uh, and the fact that this, like the genocide that is happening now in Darfur or happened before in many areas in Al Jazeera and Khartoum, has been enabled by this continuous support is something that, like we should call out the UAE as a genocider backer in Sudan. And I think we should learn from the war of in Gaza and how the people portrayed it, how uh, uh, the world kind of looked at it. When there is these kind of clear terms, there is these clear bad actors. People tend to understand more, and people tend to kind of uh, like be more active in looking into these dynamics. But I think the early narrative of the war is that this is a civil war between two generals or between two equal sides. Kind of would mean that why would we care? This is just a power struggle. Um, but I think as Samah mentioned in earlier, I think as Sudanese who has been um heavily touched by this war, um, we know that this is not as this is not a struggle between two generals. This is not a war between two equal sides. Um, yeah, and I think Prof. Ibrahim and Husam could also add to this.
I have other questions for them already, but thank you so much. Yeah, I'll answer. Okay, so the second question we have is, I talk frequently with my comrades from an independent revolutionary left group in Sudan, and they have been telling us about being attacked by what they call Islamist gangs within government-controlled zones, which they say are supported by the armed forces, but are also somewhat independent. I was wondering if you could share more analysis about these groups and what you think recent growth means for the direction of Sudan. May I direct this question to Dr. Ibrahim?
Yeah, it all depends on what you call a just war. That we don't like deny that the military the Sudan armed forces commits atrocities here and there, and even those groups that are are working with the military would commit an atrocity here and there. But I've always reconciled to the fact that what is the who is on the just, who is doing the just for? And I realized, or I picked the armed forces, and as such, and that is where we say that the Janjaweed were the aggressors. And when you make this clear, it becomes like, the military, the SAF atrocities would be unfortunate. The atrocities of the Janjaweed is terrorists. So you don't want to get into these moral equivalencies, like, this is bad and this is bad, and that will take you away really from the crux of the matter, from the reality of the confrontation going on, from all the histories you have been acquainted with now, from Yasir and from Husam. There is a real fight there, and if you just keep saying, this is bad and this is bad and this is bad, this will take you nowhere.
Thank you so much. I will direct the last question. Sorry. Husam, would you mind answering the last question, which is because you basically took us to a bit of a longer history, and basically you have encountered moments of the Great Depressions, but also happiness and forward looking and people getting together. So what have you thought about when it comes to think about solutions for this conflict?
So thank you, Salah. Thank you so much, and thank you for the question. It is difficult. I mean, if anyone tells you that they have a solution to the war now, they would be not telling the truth. It is a very difficult question. But what I know that people can do a few things, and it depends on where you are and what's your capacity to do. So first of all, let me just briefly say that the so-called international community has tendencies of enforcing its own model of peace building processes in Sudan. We have history of peace building processes sponsored and pushed by the international community throughout the last 3 or 4 decades, which usually go like this. So they bring the warring factors together. They sponsor negotiations between the warring factors, and they sign very fancy peace treaties that effectively end up sharing power and wealth between the leaders of the warring factions, and in the process not listening to any of the citizens' demands, and seeding and sowing the seeds for the next conflict. So I would advise that the international community, as countries, governments, and organizations, stop doing that. They do what they can do. What they can do is twofold. One, stopping the UAE from arming and supporting the rapid support forces. This is something they can do. They have to do. The second is um, providing the humanitarian assistance to the victims of this war. This is not, again, this is a right to of these people. This is not what we call sadaqah. This is not only being good humans. This is something they have to do. The war to and then the ordinary citizens can help in doing highlighting the pushing their governments to do these two things. They can support the civilians in Sudan, the civilians who are enduring this war and who are doing all what they can and more than what they can to survive and to make the Sudanese people survive. The war can stop only in Sudan by Sudanese, and in order for the war to stop, we should ask the questions of what kind of peace do we want? We want a sustainable peace. If a sustainable peace to be achieved, this has to be including the Sudanese citizens from all walks of life, talking to each other and realizing that what type of new Sudan they want to build. And this is a very tough. There is no short answer to this, no simple answer to it. But this is the only way. I see all the efforts of the international community going, regardless of who the players are going to, in the best case, and let's say that even with the best of intentions, will lead to reaching a formula that is similar to the formula that led to the war, dividing or sharing the government between the army and the rapid support forces in some way or another, and having a representation of civilians who are usually the civilians that are liked most by the international community. This will never work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the answer. Yasir, do you a last word on that, and then we'll wrap it up?
Yeah,
Thanks
if I can also respond to Chris' question. I think he mentioned that there was left group in Sudan under areas controlled by the government, and they're being attacked by Islamist gangs. So from as a Sudanese, as someone I think, and also did some research on this, I wrote a piece on foreign policy about how this young revolutionary would think about the war. And in this interviews, surprisingly, I actually found that revolutionaries are joining the army to defend their land. So these are not, I know these are not the narrative that has been portrayed to the West media, but a group called Ghadibun, these were kind of the most kind of left-leaning radical groups against the coup in 2021. And they in no ways you're going to think these groups are going to join the army, actually take arms against RSF. But when you speak to them, I think their vision is clear, is either you have a state or not. I think that what I learned from them, and that what I've seen in on the ground. And I think there is hope on that. There is hope is that the Sudanese youth are united to defend their land, to defend their state. They see this very clearly as an aggression by the UAE-backed forces. And it's even not because they support the army per se. They have so many reservation about the army and how they led the transition, and but they also know who has been looting their houses, has been raping their mothers and sisters, has been killing their families. But they know this from first experience. Like they don't listen about this. They've seen it in Khartoum. They've seen it in Al Jazeera. So I think people on the ground are very aware of this. What side to choose. There might be some kind of skirmishes, arrest, because it's still it's a country that has been, it's a city. Khartoum is specifically has been under the RSF for almost 2 years. And institutions are yet, back at their full capacity. There are always, things to address. But my own belief is that the people on the ground know kind of which side they would choose. Yeah.
Thank you, Yasir. And with that, we came to the end of this teaching. This was an absolutely great coming together. And I think this is important, especially during these times, learning from each other, understanding, that things are not just sudden, things that don't just appear, right? As we are often very much told in the West, like this is now the time to focus on this issue or that issue, as if these things just suddenly appear. So having a conversation about the background, having a conversation about what is happening on the ground, what are the experiences of the people. That's why we also wanted to start with an account of the students, because these are real things. And often in the academic world or in journalism or whatever, it becomes abstract. And everything that you have said about this basically shows you that we should not stay in that space of, where it's abstract and where things are theoretical. These are real things that happen. I appreciate the time that you have taken to address this, and I hope we will find each other again, inshallah, very soon to keep talking about this. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Shukran. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you all.